Dissecting the DC chaos, one spin at a time. Welcome to Climate and Chaos with Jay Bashayo. Here's Jay.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the one and only Climate and Chaos with Jay. And I am Jay, of course. I thank you so much for stopping by this week. So, it's been an eventful week, has it not? I mean, is there any other way to say it except for eventful, crazy, unhinged, specifically referring to the left with that last one there. But they've been completely unhinged in their rhetoric. But of course, they try to put it on the president and blame him for just about everything. We had 2 mass shootings this week. That was definitely a tragedy by 2 completely unstable individuals that were not in their right minds. Probably the mental health of these people was more to blame than anything else for these shootings. These were people that more than likely exhibited personality traits that probably were leading up to the fact that if somebody was watching their behavior, this might have been caught by someone, but it wasn't. Unfortunately not. It turned into tragedy. The first shooting that we had this week was on the 3rd. It was in El Paso, Texas at a Walmart. 22 dead, 25 were injured. 21-year-old Patrick Cruces took an AK-47 style weapon. He's also known as Patrick Wood Brown. So if you hear that name, that's the same guy. His attack was intended to be a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. Now, that's all the Democrats needed to go after President Trump and blame his rhetoric and his rallies for this particular shooting. Patrick Cruces actually left a 2,300-word manifesto behind, and it was called The Inconvenient Truth. He supported the Christchurch shooter. He was against race mixing. It destroys genetic diversity and creates identity problems, he said. He also said because it's selfish and unnecessary. He mentioned things like don't attack heavily guarded areas to fulfill super soldier Call of Duty fantasy. Attack low security areas. I mean, you probably were wondering the first thing I was wondering when I heard about this. This is the state of Texas. How was nobody armed, and how didn't somebody take this guy down muy pronto immediately? Well, that would be because this particular Walmart in El Paso was a gun-free zone. Now, I think everybody's familiar with what a gun-free zone is. You know, those are areas where either designated by law or designated by the owner of the property, carried concealed weapons cannot be taken onto the premises. So this guy, in his ramblings, knew to attack soft targets. This was a very soft target. It was a high-value target as far as opportunity. He knew that nobody in there would be armed. He knew that it being El Paso, he figured it'd be a high population of Hispanic people, and he knew it would be suitable for his task. He aimed for soft targets. Now, that's something that we need to change in this country, regardless of what anyone tells you. There shouldn't be gun-free areas. We protect our money. We protect our celebrities. We protect all of those with guns, but we don't protect areas like Walmart where there are children because somebody is anti-Second Amendment and doesn't want guns brought on the property. So this guy knew what he was looking for. He was looking for somewhere soft. And like I was saying, another part of this manifesto was actually not brought to light by many people whatsoever. The only person I know that brought this to light, Byron York, wrote a piece. And in it, he quoted from the shooter's manifesto. All these people blaming President Trump obviously ignore the facts, just like they always do. They have their own truths, and that's what they believe in, and they don't believe in the facts. But there was actually a quote in this manifesto where this guy said, "My opinions are predate to Trump and his campaign for presidency. I put this here because some people will blame the president or certain presidential candidates for this attack. This is not the case. I know the media will probably call me a white supremacist anyway and blame Trump's rhetoric. The media is famous for fake news. Their reaction to this attack will likely just confirm that." So everybody overlooked that, except for Byron York, and decided that President Trump was the one we're going to blame this on. And so what happened next? Things got worse. We had another shooting on the 4th, this time in Dayton, Ohio, leaving 10 dead, 27 injured. 24-year-old Connor Betts, who had a history of problems. Probably if the right people were looking at the right time, this might have been avoided. You can never really say if it could be avoided or not. The truth is, we don't really know, except for like in the case of Parkland, where the guy had 36 visits to his house from the police department, and yet they still acted like they didn't see it coming. Completely ridiculous in its own right. Anyway, this guy was messed up. Okay, he had a hit and a rape list dating back to high school. He loved socialism. He was fascinated with the work of Ted Bundy and other serial killers. He admitted he had mental illness. Now, this guy was an Elizabeth Warren fanatic. He was all about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Now, let me just go on record for saying right now, I don't personally believe that any particular person is responsible for the mad actions of a maniac. I mean, there's nothing that you can particularly do that can drive someone to mass murder. It was already in their DNA or programmed in their personality flaw before the event took place. So I don't believe in blaming somebody, just as much as I don't believe President Trump was responsible for the El Paso shooting with his rhetoric, his rallies, or anything like that. I don't personally hold Elizabeth Warren responsible for this shooting in Dayton. I don't blame Bernie Sanders for this either. I just don't see it as their fault. I think this guy was mentally ill. I think both of these guys were mentally ill. He was already diagnosed as bipolar. He actually hated President Trump. He interacted with leftists on social media. He liked tweets about the El Paso shooting. So this guy was really busy in preparation for this shooting at a nightclub. This was at a nightclub, Dayton, Ohio. Of course, now everybody jumped on the bandwagon to blame President Trump. The mayor, Nan Whaley of Dayton, Ohio, who I believe President Trump has actually sparred with in the past, she was none too warming. A couple days after these took place, President Trump had decided that he was going to do the right thing, like he always does, and he was going to go and pay respect to the people of Dayton and El Paso that were affected by this tragedy. Of course, you have people like Robert Francis O'Rourke, who says President Trump isn't welcome in El Paso. You know, President Trump is welcome anywhere he wants to go in the United States. He is the president. I mean, wouldn't most people agree with that? At least most sane, logical people? Nan Whaley wasn't real big on him coming to Dayton either. So here's the president trying to do the right thing, play the role of consoler-in-chief, which is one of his responsibilities anytime we have a national tragedy. He's doing the right thing, and these people are completely dismissive of it. And personally, I think that that is making this tragedy solely about themselves. This is no longer about the victims when they decide that the President of the United States is not welcome in the place where this happened. They are being completely selfish, which I don't think anyone has grown to expect anything more from Robert Francis than him to be all about himself. I mean, he's polling at like 0%, so he's got to pull something out. So he wants to be the face of those injured and those killed in El Paso, and he wants to jump into the limelight, throw a Hail Mary, and think he's going to resurrect his presidential campaign, which we all know isn't going to happen. So, what ensues every time we have a mass shooting in this country? Everybody wants to talk about gun control. Everybody wants to blame the gun. Going into the weekend and coming into the new week, that is where we are now. Now, President Trump has had some interesting takes on this, and he's said a few things back and forth, but he hasn't committed one way or another to anything. He has talked about universal background checks and strengthening new background checks. I don't know what's wrong with the current background checks. I think they're pretty indicative of anything you might have done wrong that would preclude you from owning a weapon. But he's talking about new universal background checks. And he's brought up something that I'm going to spend some time talking about now, because I think this is a big thing, and I think it's the wrong thing, but it needs to be discussed because it is on the table. Of course, it's a liberal talking point, but now President Trump has even alluded to it. And that is these red flag laws. What a red flag law basically is, it's set up to identify shooters before they become shooters, basically, based on their patterns of behavior. Now, the problem with them is that they involve no due process. That is the first thing right there. No due process. In other words, somebody that has a grudge with you can pick up a phone, call a tip line, say you're acting suspicious or you're acting in a threatening manner or something of that effect, and police are basically just going to come over and take your weapons. Now, obviously, that's unconstitutional, wrong on many levels. I understand the point that they want to take the guns out of the hands of the criminally insane, which, of course, I don't believe should have the right to a gun, but they can't trample the Constitution in order to do that, and that's exactly what red flags do. Red flag laws walk all over our due process rights. You're supposed to be afforded due process if you're accused of a crime, and until you are proven guilty, you are innocent, and we don't take guns away from innocent people. There's too much room for abuse in this system. There's too much room for somebody with different political beliefs, possibly, or your neighbor gets angry at you because you mowed over onto his lawn or whatever, and he says, well, I'm going to fix this guy, and he picks up a phone, calls a tip line to whoever it goes to, and the next thing you know, you got a knock on your door, and the police are trying to confiscate your weapons. That would be completely wrong. And the thing is, too, we have nothing to base any type of success on as far as red flag goes. Now, in Florida, the Parkland shooter, he was red flagged. Florida has red flag laws. Absolutely failed. What were there, 36 contacts or whatever it was with the police, the FBI, or whoever, with Cruz, with the shooter down there in Parkland? There were all these contacts under red flag law, and absolutely it all failed. Apparently, this guy in Dayton, too, this Betts guy, Betts was being watched as well, or there had been contact with his family or with him, or, well, this guy was, he was an adult, so the contact would actually be with him, but nobody saw anything to feel that he should have his weapons taken away. There was nothing there that anyone saw. Now, does that mean that it wasn't there entirely? No, it could have been missed. It absolutely could have and probably was missed. But the fact is, there's nothing that shows that these red flag laws are going to work at all. But the thing that just cannot be ignored is the fact that the whole unconstitutionality angle of the whole thing. They're unconstitutional. You cannot sacrifice our Second Amendment in order to grant these red flag laws. You know, and the argument is constantly made from the left. Anytime this happens, the left loves a tragedy. You will hear me say that again before this is over because I say it all the time. And it's sad, but it's true. The left loves to try to propagandize a tragedy. They love to just jump all over it. Now, it should come as no shock to you that Elizabeth Warren was trying to fundraise off this within 24 hours of the shootings. And she was actually sending out emails trying to fundraise off of it. I believe Bernie Sanders, Robert Francis was also trying to fundraise off this. It's absolutely disgusting. And in the meantime, we're going to have this gun debate like we do every single time there's a shooting. And the Dems are going to try to push further and further to try to accomplish their end goal. And we all know what the end goal is. They would love to just scrub the Second Amendment straight off the Constitution. Don't let anyone tell you differently. That is their goal. Eric Swalwell, with his comments during his run, when he was talking about nuking people because the government has nukes, you can't defend against a tyrannical takeover. And these are comments that he made on Twitter. I mean, it's no surprise that Eric Swalwell was the first one to drop out of the election, and I do want to point out that I called that he would be the first one to drop out. Anyway, so the gun debate rages on, and the rhetoric rages on with it. And what happens in the meantime? On the 7th, we have a guy, Zachary Castaneda, 33 years old, in Garden Grove, California, which I guess is Southern California. He takes a knife, which from pictures looked like a butcher knife of some sort, and he decides to chop up 4 people. He killed 4. He injured 2 others. Now, this guy was a documented gang member. He faced 4 counts of murder now and other crimes. He has a criminal history from time that he had already spent in prison. He had previous felonies of drugs, gang-related violence and vandalism, car thefts, domestic violence. Now, there is something called the Lautenberg Amendment in this country. If you're convicted of domestic violence, you can never own a gun again. I don't know how many people know that, but that's a fact. It was a big issue when I was in the military because we would have soldiers that would go home, get drunk, beat up their wives or girlfriends, wives, whatever, and they would be in trouble with the law for domestic violence. And if they were convicted of domestic violence, now they could never possess a gun again. Now, that also would preclude them from military service. So there were guys that were losing their jobs as a result of domestic violence. Now, I don't see a problem with something like that either. If you're going to beat up on your wife or your girlfriend or your significant other, I'm not sure you're the kind of person that should have a gun in the first place anyway. So I'm kind of in agreement on that. So anyway, this guy was released from prison, this Zachary Castaneda guy. He was released on California Assembly Bill 109. Now, I took a look at this to see what it was all about, and there's quite a few different sides to this. But basically what AB 109 was, it was to divert people who were convicted of felonies that were not defined as serious to local county jails that had the more serious crimes to the state prisons. Now, apparently this guy with his history of violence probably shouldn't have been on the streets either. But why do I make this point, you ask? And I will tell you. I make this point to tell you that you don't need a gun to viciously kill people. There is more than one way to do it. And the argument is always made. Whenever there is a gun control debate, the argument is always made on how to take the guns out of the hands of the people that obey the laws. There have been mass shootings that have been stopped by people legally carrying guns. Just happened in Texas last year, I believe it was. There was a man that took down the church shooter, the guy that shot up the church in Texas. He was stopped by a guy that chased him down. And so there are several cases where good guys with guns stop bad guys with guns. But a gun is not necessarily needed to commit a crime. When you take away the guns, you're going to affect more legally owned, legally purchased weapons, legally possessed weapons by concealed carriers that could, in essence, stop crimes. We have a right to defend ourselves in this country. If you take away someone's right to defend themselves, then they become a soft target. Just like your gun-free zones are a soft target for the exact same reason. They're soft targets because there is nobody there that is armed and a criminal doesn't follow the law. The biggest thing that I think cannot be overlooked at this point is the absolute unhinged state of the left. Now, several other things happened this week that are just completely bonkers insane. Mitch McConnell had a crowd form on his property. He's recovering from a shoulder injury, and he's at his home when a crowd of people show up one night and are basically demanding his death. They're making death threats, yelling and chanting and screaming and having a great time, and this all gets put on tape. Now, Team Mitch, which is his Twitter handle for his re-election campaign, goes to put this out to show what has been done to him, and Big Brother Twitter takes the video down and locks up Mitch's account. So we have censorship at its finest from our big tech folks. The level of animus towards conservatives from big tech has gotten out of control. The level of unhingement from Democrats in general. See, they're not just painting President Trump as the problem anymore. They're calling all of us, all the deplorables, are now the source of problems. That since we support the president, who they deem a white supremacist and a racist, we must all be the same too. Now, obviously, there are several counter-arguments to that. The claims are completely 100% baseless, but that is what they're using to infuriate the left right now, to put out a call to violence. And that's what they're looking for right now. It's almost apparently obvious that the left is looking for a fight. A lot of people say we inch closer to a civil war, and I think it's very possible that we could be heading in that direction. And if that happens, folks, then we have to stand ready, because we're not going to lose a civil war when the life of this country is on the line. Now, we have to think about everything that the Dems stand for. Socialism and open borders and infanticide in some cases. These are not policies that we're willing to adopt as a country. And no matter how much they try to use tragedies to exploit their positions on things, are we ever going to give in? You know that, and I know that. So when you have two sides that are hell-bent in their proposals and not backing down, it's almost logical that there is going to be a clash in the middle somewhere. My point is, I'm not advocating violence, of course, but what I am saying is everyone needs to be careful. When you're out in public or whatever, you need to be careful. it probably isn't the best time to be wearing a Make America Great Again hat. Not that you shouldn't be proud of that. You absolutely should. That's part of us being the patriots that we are. But it is definitely a violent time right now. Not just the Mitch McConnell thing, but there were a couple other instances where violence could have erupted. Let's talk about Joaquin Castro for a minute. This guy, he is an original, interesting person. Now, of course, Julian Castro is running for president, which is the brother of Joaquin. He goes and he doxes a bunch of people that live in his district that contributed the maximum amount, $2,700, to the Trump campaign. He just puts out a list of their names, their businesses, their addresses, whatever he has on them, puts out a list. Now, he tries to say that he did this because he wants them to think twice about donating to a campaign of hate and this, that, and another thing. But apparently he thinks we're all born yesterday and none of us know how the left works. This was 100% a call to action for the left. He's trying to tell his supporters to harass these people. Maybe boycott these people, make their livelihood suffer, make them not have the ability to feed their families. This is what the left does now. Interesting enough, this genius that he is went and doxed one of his own supporters in the process. And that guy was rather red hot about it. I believe he said he was never going to support at least Joaquin Castro, maybe even not any more Democrats in his life. Hats off to the genius on that one. He wasn't the only one either. Now, the biggest smack in the face. Now, actually, this just changed as I'm recording this. I'm recording this on Saturday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I just got a note from my assistant that The Hunt, which is the name of this movie that Blumhouse Productions, Jason Blum of Blumhouse Productions, was going to put out a movie. They had started advertising it. It was called The Hunt. And this movie is solely about liberals hunting deplorables. Yep, liberals hunting deplorables for sport. Now I ask you, Hollywood really wants to get involved in this. We already know that Hollywood is full of leftists and wackos and crazy individuals to begin with, but now they want to get involved in this call for violence. Well, apparently they must have thought twice about it because, as I was saying, I was just handed a note that The Hunt has been canceled. They will not be releasing such a movie now. Now, there was a lot of public reaction to this. Obviously, everybody that I saw on Twitter was kind of upset about it. I know I was. And I think I made some disparaging comments about it if anybody saw my Twitter. I was very active on Twitter this week. So if anyone saw my Twitter, and I don't know if I've ever made this clearly apparent, but I probably should. I keep my podcast PG. But I do not do the same with my Twitter account. So if you're following me on Twitter, just be advised, okay, that I kind of let it all rip when I'm on Twitter. So that is just one of my outlets to voice my frustration and to challenge liberal mentality when I see it, which is a good thing that all of us can do. We have to change minds somehow, folks. We have to make more people see things from the perspective of patriotism and helping and loving one another and caring about responsibilities that we are entrusted as patriots of this country. We can't let the left take over with their insane views. And speaking of insane views, we're about to get to some of mine in this week's Chaos Reduction. Okay, so what's the biggest takeaway of this week? I think we are left with several questions at this point. How do we change the narrative about guns in this country and gain control of our Second Amendment rights? How do we quell the violence from the left and avoid their hit-piece attempts to smear us constantly? And how do we stop mass shootings stands out as a question, too. Constant attempts by people in power to infringe on what is not to be infringed upon has a lot of people nervous right now, and you can put me in that camp as well. So we keep having mass shootings, and the Democrat reaction is always the same: ban guns. First, they want to start with the assault rifles, which in and of itself is just a media term that carries no clear definition or worth. They want to ban AR-15s and such, but are okay with hunting rifles that work exactly the same way, so it must come down to aesthetics, right? They want to ban the scary-looking ones, in other words. But aside from that for a moment, Do you ever hear them talk about the mental health issues as a root cause? No, they don't, but they should. It seems like every time we have a shooting, we always hear after the fact that he had signs of being unstable, erratic, or even psychopathic, and that these behaviors were observed prior to the act, but never reported. This is a huge problem, and one that Democrats are ignoring in favor of desecrating our rights as citizens. Truth is, there have already been several successful attempts to place limitations on the Second Amendment, such as the National Firearms Act and the Firearms Safety Act of 1986, to name a couple. Even Justice Scalia noted that the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. So instead of enforcing the laws we have on the books already, they want to impose more regulation when we know that that is not the answer. To completely remain devoid of the stigma of mental health in this country is without a doubt a ridiculous act. Changes need to be made in the see something, say something arena if we want to actually control the outbreak of mass shootings. Guns have always been around, but we didn't always have these events. Children being raised improperly and, dare I say, neglected, have contributed to substandard mental health in our youth, which is a growing category of those responsible for mass shootings. Parents, teachers, and counselors are all the people that should be able to notice telltale signs when they arise. They are the ones that need to be able to recognize these indicators before they develop into actions and get the affected person the required help they need. We are a society that glorifies violence through television and video games, which I believe is fine, as long as children know where these things stop and real life begins. After the bullets fly, it's too late for that lesson to be taught. But we often find ourselves in this fight of our lives, trying to get this point across to the other side of the aisle. They constantly harp on the fact that our rights are not more important than human life, as if they aren't the party that's for abortion. No, they're perfectly okay with that, just not our guns. One is murder, and the other is women's reproductive health in their eyes. Our right to bear arms is absolutely granted by God, ensured by the Constitution, and is possibly the most important right we're afforded. To take that away would truly mean the collapse of society. We have the right to defend ourselves, our property, and the safety of our loved ones at all times. It's more than a right, it's a duty. Eliminating guns is an adverse action to that. The Second Amendment was truly enacted to deter the thought of government takeover, a concept that is not all that far-fetched if you look at certain events through history. If a society is removed of its guns, that society has become dependent on the government and in effect entered a police state. Our founding fathers saw the potential for that and set up this very safeguard to prevent it. It cannot be taken away. After every mass shooting, there's an attempt to put our rights up for debate, and this time the left is in a perpetual state of violence. All they do is blame our problems on their political enemies, as if that's a solution for anything. Changes need to be made, but not with our guns. Our rights are not for sale, they aren't negotiable, and they aren't something we would just hand over either. Blood was shed for our rights on several occasions, and they aren't the kind of thing we take lightly. Many of us will do whatever is necessary to protect them. At the same time as all of this, the left has stepped up their violent rhetoric to all new heights, and we as patriots are left to contend. They have done underhanded things that could lead to violence, and they have also committed blatant acts of violence such as Antifa gatherings that get out of control. They point a finger at us, calling us racists and white supremacists, and they think they will continue to go unchallenged. This divisive ridicule must stop before things get way out of hand. We truly live in dangerous times. So knowing all we know about society, violence, and gun-grabbing Democrats, what exactly are we supposed to do now? About all we can do is continue to support our beliefs without reservation. We need to stand for our rights and not let the government work them down into nothingness. We need to call out injustice where we see it and make sure we are doing whatever it takes to watch the back of each and every patriot we know. It's a time where our side must come together during these vicious attacks because that is how we win. This is how we will maintain our rights, our freedoms, and our way of life. And this is how we'll ensure a better and safer generation for our children, and this is certainly how we'll win in 2020. We'll do it as one people with one purpose. That purpose being to secure our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, just like our founders intended. Okay, so we talked about a lot of things today. We have to be extremely vigilant about the fact that the left is getting ever so violent. They are creeping more and more towards levels of insanity, if you ask me, in my opinion. But we have to be on guard at all times. It appears that this rhetoric is probably going to get a lot worse before it gets ever better. Another thing I want to point out along the lines of red flag laws, now keep in mind, Dan Crenshaw feels like he has a solution to this red flag situation. If you see, he has a video that he posted up on, at least on Twitter. I know it's on Twitter. It might be other places, but something I want you to pay particular attention to. He is talking about how the argument of red flag, the left has their version of it and the right has our version of it. Now, the things that he quickly explained in this video were, he says that there will be due process and that we will have punishments for people that make false accusations against others. Folks, this is just more of the same stuff. Okay, this is making new requirements, moving goalposts on existing laws, and just creating pitfalls here. Think about this. You're going to make punishments for people that create false accusations against another person. Well, that's great and all. That's wonderful that you're going to punish them, but what exactly does that do once my weapons have been taken from me without a hearing of some kind? Still, once again, this is no better off than any Democrat version, just being that it's labeled that it's a quote-unquote Republican version. It's not any better. So I hope you've taken out of this the fact that we need to start looking more at mental health and things like that, mental health and the way children are being raised versus guns being the problem. Last I checked, none of my guns just get up and shoot people. They are inanimate objects, and they are controlled by people. Therefore, people kill people. Guns don't kill people. I believe Charles Bronson used to say something very similar to that, but I digress. Anyway, you have been listening to Climate and Chaos, and again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys coming out to listen to me talk. If you're not following me, make sure you do follow me. I am at Proud OIF Vet on Twitter and Parler. Much, much appreciate it. Again, this is Climate and Chaos with Jay. I thank you for being here today, and until next time, be good to each other.